Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of ClueCon Weekly. Joining us this week is Ryan Carroll, Senior Software Engineer at Cover My Meds, and developer, IoT enthusiast, and a lot of other things. Thank you for joining us today, Ryan.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, we're happy to have you. So, would you like to start with a quick introduction about yourself, maybe?
Sure, yeah. So, like you said just a second ago, my name's Ryan, and I'm currently at Cover My Meds in Columbus, Ohio. And I have been a full stack engineer for about 8 years or so. And most of my experience has been in the full stack web space. So, web APIs, web front ends, back ends, that sort of thing, dabbling in databases. So that's been kind of my bread and butter for a while now. And I've started embarking on this journey a little more recently about diving into more side projects and expanding my horizons a little bit beyond just the typical web stacks that I do at my day to day. But yeah, there's a just a brief quick about me.
Nice. Yeah, I think so. The topic we were talking about is IoT, which is something that is not spoken about enough in current topic. I think it's really a topic that's still perceived as being too technical. So maybe we can start with how you got into IoT. Like I know you do other stuff, you do front end, you do a lot of full stack work, but this is very interesting. So how did you get to doing some IoT work first of all?
Yeah, for sure. So like you said, IoT is a little bit far removed from my day to day. So it's definitely more on the passion project side of things. And when I was looking at IoT to begin with, it's really all of the possibilities of things that you can do with IoT and this landscape of ideas that you can really bring to life and accomplish some really fun
Hmm.
and interesting things when it comes to IoT because you have all of these different devices and sensors, and there's all of this data that you can gather, or you can get motors or servos or what have you and start building really fun things with it. So it really just expands what's possible when you're used to just, typical front end and back end systems. It really explodes out that possibility. So, for my journey in particular with IoT, it's an interesting story. So, I live kind of on the outskirts of the city, and I've been living in this house that I'm in here for a few years now. And I promise this relates to IoT. I'm going to bring it back around, but this is part of that
Yeah.
story,
Oh,
part
you
of
need a
that
background,
journey.
right?
Yeah. So, um, I live just a little bit off of an intersection. So there's a fairly busy intersection that's a little bit in front of my home. And typically what happens on a nice day outside is people will pull up to this intersection and the light's red and they'll sit there for a minute and then the light turns green and they just really like to push that pedal down and just take off. And when they do that, it's really, really, really loud, especially when you have like motorcycles or sports cars or things of that nature. It just creates all of this noise all of the time. And after a while, that started to really get to me and really bother me. And I would constantly tell people, yeah, I moved into this house and the windows are thin and it's just noisy all the time. And I would try to convey to them how much it was bothering me and how noisy it really was. But it's hard to do that with just words and just trying to explain it to somebody. And after a while, I started to think, it would be really cool if I could gather empirical, factual data on how
Oh,
loud my yard really is. Because, like, I can tell you my yard is loud, but
yeah, but
if I
doesn't
have
mean anything. Quotes. It's
exactly, because it's really subjective, right? What's loud for me may not be loud for you, and you're trying to like picture like, okay, his yard is probably noisy, it's whatever. But if I could come to you and say, no, here's the data of exactly how loud my yard is, that changes the story a little bit. So that like sparked this whole journey on how can I measure exactly how loud my yard is, and how can I use that to tell a story and convey that information to people. So of course we have, that's where IoT comes in, where
Mhm.
you can get sensors and you can start to measure those kind of things. And I did this whole project involving just that. So we can dive into that or poke into whatever pieces you want, but that's really what sparked the journey for me, because I really enjoy the outdoors. I'm a very nature oriented kind of person. I really enjoy hiking and backpacking and getting out into the backcountry where it's really quiet and peaceful. So the quiet is extremely valuable to me, which is part of why being in a noisy environment bothers me so much, to drive me to a place where I want to collect this data and figure out how to collect it and share it with people.
It's like it's really. I mean, okay. Let's start from first of all. Congratulations! Like that's a very solid way to get started, and that's solving your own problem. It's always a way to start things moving, right? It always
Yeah,
works, in my opinion. It's almost the only way I learn something. For example, whether it's a
yeah,
work project, I
absolutely.
every time Singapore releases a new product, I the only way I have to really truly learn it, even if I participate in actually making the product, is setting out and building almost production project, like things that will people will use. So you get the odds and ends, you learn what's if. So it's really really interesting. So well, maybe we start from the stack. Like, how did you? What did you use to build your IoT solution? First of all, I assume there's some open source stuff, some non-open source, and both the hardware and the software are very interesting to me.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll start with the hardware side. The hardware was fairly simple. So I started out with a Raspberry Pi. And when I talk about this, I often get questions of, why did you choose the Pi specifically? There's microcontrollers and all of these different things available. And a couple very simple reasons that I went with the Pi. One is, if you're a nerd, then you have a Pi sitting around on a shelf somewhere already. And I have several different Raspberry Pis that I just had sitting around that I wasn't using. So it was hardware that I already had that was accessible to me. And then the other reason is, jumping straight into something like an Arduino or a microcontroller was a little bit intimidating to me at first, because I haven't done a ton of stuff with IoT yet. And the Raspberry Pi was a little bit more approachable for me when I was starting out. So the exact model, I think, is the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus, if I
Mhm.
remember correctly. It's a little bit of an older model, but it definitely gets the job done. And then there's this vendor called Pi Moroni,
Mhm.
which sells lots of different sensors and things for Raspberry Pis and Arduinos. And they make this module called a Enviro Plus module. And
Mhm.
I have a very small version. This is the
Oh,
version for the
nice,
Pico. What's that?
nice. You have one sitting around. Oh,
I
so they're not
do.
big at
So I don't
all.
know if my camera is going to focus. There it goes. So
There you go.
this is for
Yeah,
the Pico. This isn't the exact one
very
that I
very
use,
nice.
but it's just a little chip that sits on top of the Raspberry Pi. So the Raspberry Pi has those pins on it, and the Enviro Plus module just sits nicely on top of those pins. So I didn't even have to really solder or anything for this one. And what that module gets you is a microphone. It does temperature, humidity, some of your basic weather type of functions, but the microphone is mainly what I was after. So as far as the hardware goes, those were really the only two components, is the Pi and then the Enviro module that has the sensors. And then as far as software goes, I have a Python script that runs,
Hmm.
and it will take readings from the microphone and convert those readings into decibel values, which is actually pretty complicated to do. When I was getting into this project, I've always been interested in sound and audio,
Hmm.
and I forgot to mention this earlier in my about me, but I do on Sundays I do a little bit of audio engineering at the church that I go to. I run audio for them a few times a month. So audio's it's a something that I enjoy quite a bit. So anyways, coming back to where I was at, converting an audio signal to decibels is a little bit of an undertaking. So that was a lot of research that I had to do and quite a bit of digging on the internet to find other people that had done the same thing using Python. So that was an obstacle that I wasn't quite prepared for,
Hmm.
but ended up getting through it. So there's the Python script. It just takes a reading, spits out a decibel value at the end. And then on the database side of things, so I needed a place to store all of those readings.
Hmm.
And I have a instance of InfluxDB that I'm running on a server inside my home. And I can talk about why I chose that in a
Yeah,
moment,
I
but
think
it's yeah, go ahead.
I don't know what influx actually is, so there's maybe we can start from there.
Yeah, for sure. So when I started this project, I didn't know what Influx was either, but it is a time series
Hmm. Yeah.
database.
Okay.
So from the world that I come from, I'm used to using things like SQL Server and lots of Postgres databases, but I was doing some research as to what kind of database would be good to use in this situation, and I didn't even know that time series databases were a thing. So through my searching, and I was talking to different colleagues and friends, and they suggested, it sounds like for what you're doing, a time series database would be ideal because you're really collecting data over time. I'm taking all of these decibel readings that occur at a point in time, and I need to store them. So that's really what a time series database is built
Hmm.
for. And as you
Yeah,
get into
definitely.
more IoT projects, a lot of IoT data is time-based data, time-based sensor readings. So InfluxDB is a good choice for that. They have a good open source offering, which
Hmm.
is what I'm using, and I've got it running in Docker on my server. So most of my stuff I have Dockerized, and it's using Docker Compose to run. So that's where all of the readings are being stored. And then for the last piece of it, the visualization piece, I'm using Grafana to do that.
Oh,
So
nice. Yeah,
most
we use Grafana too.
Yeah, yeah, lots of places use it for monitoring purposes. It's really popular for like CPU, memory usage, that kind of stuff. But it's got lots of built-in graphics libraries. It has an open source flavor. It's pretty simple to stand up and run on your own. So that's what I chose to visualize the data. And it plugs into Influx very nicely. So it's already configured to have a connector over to the InfluxDB portion and pull that data in and then display it however you want to display it. So that's the stack kind of from start to finish there.
Yeah, I think Grafana just does a lot of pulls a lot of weight in many projects. It's really very good platform to visualize. So, well, maybe
Yes.
we could start from something that I always ask people when they come on the podcast, which is, what was the most difficult part of what you've been building? Like, what took you the longest? What is the biggest challenge?
Yeah, I think that the hardest piece, I'm gonna cheat and give you 2 hardest pieces, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But the number 1 hardest piece was converting the audio reading to decibel values. So when I bought the Enviro module, I saw that it came with its own Python library, and it had lots of examples in there on how to use the Python library to get the different readings and such. So if you want to get the temperature reading from the hardware, it's really easy to do so, or humidity or what have you. What I didn't realize was they didn't have an example to get decibel values.
Yeah.
What they did have was you can show amplitude at frequencies for the audio, but that's where it ended. It didn't I was really after that decibel value in the end, and it didn't quite go that far. And I didn't
Mm,
realize when I bought it that the library lacked that. So it was one of those situations where I'm getting it all put together. I'm in my code editor. It's like, all right, we're going to do this. We're going to get decibel values. Oh, wait a minute. How do we do decibel values? This thing isn't, the library's not going to give me what I'm looking for. So now I have to figure out, how do I do this? So that took a lot of research and digging around and finding other GitHub projects of people trying to do the same thing. And eventually I
mm.
found a script that somebody had written and open sourced using an Enviro to do this reading that I was trying to do. And the file was several hundred lines long, I think, just because there was so much that went into it. So I had to find that script and then read through it and try to understand it as best I could and then adapt it over to my situation. So that was probably the hardest part. I wasn't necessarily expecting to have to get that far in the weeds with it, and it wasn't just like an easy Google search, here's the answer, here's how you do it.
Yeah.
It was a lot more complicated than that, which I think when you're doing side projects, that happens a lot. You'll run into things that you're not quite prepared for, and you don't have necessarily a coworker right across the desk that has done the same thing. It's just kind of you and the internet, and you have to figure it out. And that is not always easy, but it's a good learning experience usually.
Yeah,
The
it's a
the other
classic. If
thing,
I, yeah, go ahead.
no, go for it.
I mean, it's a classic. I am a backend engineer by trade, and you end up having to learn something about front end real quick, which will be the reverse of what you had in your side. Maybe will be something with embedded hardware, which doesn't know very
Right.
well either. It should work, but it doesn't. It's
Right. Exactly. It should work, but it doesn't, and I'm not really sure why, and I'm not familiar enough with this field to ask the right questions to get to the right answers. You're just kind of feeling around in the dark a little bit, and you have to roll back to some of those more fundamental problem-solving skills. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it is. What it feels like to me is that when we, as well, I mean, again, as seasoned engineers, if you go into something that's not in your comfort zone, you go back to the tutorial stage, back when we were getting started, and you get a quick tutorial of a blog post, and it will work. And wow, so this is that easy? It is not that easy. They should put that at the
Right.
end of any. I do write some content. I should do it like disclaimer. This is not actually that easy, but
Right.
it's
Yeah. Yeah, you as soon as you try to go outside of the box or outside of the tutorial and you try to do your own thing, you very quickly realize, okay, there's a lot of complexity here that the tutorial was hiding from me or didn't dive into.
Yeah, it is. It happens very, very often. Okay, so what about the hardware? Was it hard to, well, aside from the Raspberry, which generally is, I mean, relatively easy to source. Was it hard to find the actual hardware?
Not really. So finding the actual hardware wasn't too bad. So I mentioned that I had the Raspberry Pi already, and I think back when I started this, it may have been where when there was still some hardware shortages going on, but because I was using a lower grade model, I think that had I not had the hardware already, it wouldn't have been too bad to get it. And then the sensor was pretty easy to find when I was doing my initial research and trying to find how can I get audio readings from a Raspberry Pi and be able to visualize them and such. That sensor came up pretty near the top, especially because it's so beginner friendly and
Yeah.
it didn't really require any soldering and such. The website that I was looking at initially, I think it would have had to ship from the UK. And I've ordered parts from them before, and it didn't
Mm.
take too long to get them. But fortunately, I was able to get this sensor from Micro Center. I don't know if you guys have Micro Center where you're at or if your listeners have Micro Center, but it's a like a computer parts superstore, and
Hmm.
there's a branch of them here in the Columbus area. So they stock Raspberry Pis and all kinds of different sensors and things, and they happen to have this particular sensor in stock at the time. So I was fortunately able to just run down to the store and pick it up, and I was golden.
Nice, yeah. So yeah, the some I'm asking because I've dabbled into some. I'm admittedly not much IoT, but some of it. And every time my problem with that was that I had a parts list like 10 parts, and I had nine, and the other was
Okay.
unfindable, or I would have to have it shipped from China, and it would
Yeah.
take 6 weeks, and you had to buy 100, which is
Yep.
sometimes it's not a problem. Like they're 50 cents each, so it's just 50. Well, whatever. I'll drop $50 on this, but it will take 13 weeks to ship over because
Right.
at the point you're just buying in bulk, and then it's just, I mean, you're going through different channels. All in all, it's just a different kind of thing. So finding hardware is always a problem. So any clues I can get from people as to where to find the hardware is always. So what's the plan for expanding this? Are you working on it further? Any additions, sensors, better software? What's the next step?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have thought a bit about this, and I think that at some point it would be fun to build out another sensor and put it at a different location. So I have
Hmm.
friends and family that live further outside of the city where it's quieter, and I could put a sensor at one of their places and then have maybe a line graph that compares the two locations. And then I've also got people that live further inside the city where it could potentially be louder or quieter. We don't know. And I could just build out these different sensors and deploy them to different locations and do a contrast and comparison of noise levels at different spots. There's always the option to do a weather station, so it's got a lot of those weather capabilities on it already. And I know there's a lot of citizen science kind of projects where you can, if you have a weather station, you can contribute to a public API and contribute your weather data to the overall ecosystem, which could be
Oh,
fun
really?
to do.
Never heard of project like that, but it's really. I mean, I should look it up. It's probably something I could contribute to.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's called Luftdaten or something like that. I don't know the exact name off the top of my head, but I if you search like citizen science weather station, something like that should probably come up. And there's all kinds of projects where you can contribute your own data, and then you can go on there and see, oh, here's this other person in this other country or state or city or whatever, and here's their weather data that they're contributing, and over here, and then here's mine, and it's kind of neat to look at. But so I might do something like that. There is another project that I am in the planning phase of right now, and I wanna tease it a little bit and not give too
Mhm,
much away, but I wanna do something with air quality, and
yeah.
I've got some ideas on how to make that a little more interesting too. So that one's gonna be a little bit more complicated, and I have some more pieces to think about with it, but that's another one that I'm going to be hopefully doing over this next year, and that's why I have the other Enviro sensor that I just showed you for
Mhm.
the Raspberry Pi Pico.
What I really like is going back to your original introduction is the concept of I didn't know, like what you just said is perfectly right. I think it's noisy, but is it? And the fact that you now know is extremely important. Like now you can say that it's noisy, or you maybe you don't. I mean, it's you could say it's
Yeah,
not.
exactly. And I'll tell you that when I got this project up and running for the first time, so I finally got all the components together and it was tested and it was working and I dialed it in and I put it out on my back porch and now I have this new data that I'm collecting. It just brought such a level of joy
Hmm.
that I was collecting this data and it was my own data. And there were times where I was sitting at home and I'm like almost daring somebody to drive by and just be
Hmm.
really loud because I'm like, now I know how loud that is. Now I've got a good reading and I can see that. And just the joy and satisfaction from all of that coming together and accomplishing the purpose that I wanted it to, it was really, really good. And something that I like to tell people when I'm talking about side projects and encouraging others to do something that they're interested in, you really have to find like what am I passionate about and what drives me and how can I turn that into a project? If you're just doing a project just because or something that you don't really care about, especially if it's something on the side, then it might not go very far. But if you really find what is it that I really care about? What is it that I'm passionate about? How can I use technology for that? Then that's where the magic can start to really happen.
Yeah, I super agree. The getting into something you like is the only, again, it's the only way I'll learn for starters. So I almost have to do it. Sometimes you realize it's what you're doing is not very fun, but you have to do it all the same. That's the difference. But
Yeah,
that's called work. So sometimes we have to do it. But in general, it
right,
is definitely a very good learning curve and get out of your comfort zone. And well, that's what I'm doing with front end. Like right now I'm learning to do a little bit of React just because I need to, and it's enlightening, like to see how people thought about some problems, solutions, and sometimes you disagree with the decisions that were taken. It's-
right.
well, that's
Yeah,
I think
React.
that's a good, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say React is it's its own beast. There's a lot of headspace that React occupies for me because it's not the most it's I really like it and I think it's very powerful and it's very good, but it's complex at times.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree about the complexity. It is definitely complex and can be daunting. Well, I mean, that's probably a good seg you into another question, which is what will you do different? Like, is there anything you probably would have started with and or done different, picked a different stack, whatever? It's always useful to look back.
Yeah, for sure. That is a great question. I think that I would have looked maybe for some different sensor hardware that supported decibels from the beginning so that I didn't have
Mm,
to do all of the complicated logic myself or find logic that did it. Something that was a little more purpose built just for that. Because the Enviro is more of a jack of all trades. It has a ton of different sensors and can do a ton of different things. But the one niche that I needed it for, it was capable of, but didn't support it out of the box. So maybe just had I been a little bit more careful and researched the sensors a little bit better, that may have helped me out. And the Enviro was a little bit more on the expensive end because it does so much. And I think if I had found something that was maybe just a microphone, it would have been a lot more cost effective. So that would be one thing. Um, Another thing might have been exploring microcontrollers a little bit more. So there's a lot of overhead that you have to deal with when you're running a full Raspberry Pi with a full OS on it. And some things may have been easier if I was using a microcontroller, but it's also an environment that I'm not familiar with. So it could have also been more complicated at the same time. But yeah, those are just a couple of the ideas off of the top of mind there for what I would have changed.
Decibel calculations, the engineering student killer. Like that's I distinctly remember failing a test in university about a decibel calculation. That stuff is
Yeah,
not easy at all. It's it kind the measurement unit is so counterintuitive. It's not even funny. Like it's literally not what you think it is.
right. Yeah, it's there's a lot to it, and there's a lot of pitfalls in there for sure.
It's a really, and that's I can see how that would be a problem. Like I totally agree. Again, as someone who was bit by decibel, I'm pretty sure I will have the same problem. Well, I mean,
Yeah,
Ryan, thank you very much. It's always great to see someone stepping out of their comfort zone, doing something different, and getting it to work, which is the important part. Otherwise, it's way less fun. Any conferences you'll be speaking to in the future, or anything you'll be any events you'll be attending? Some people might be interested in maybe the same events you are.
oh, yeah, good question. Thank you for asking that. So, I do have a speaking engagement coming up in May. I will be
Mm.
speaking at Stir Trek in Columbus, Ohio, and I will be giving a talk there about using React Native and Expo to bring your ideas to life in mobile applications. So it'll be more of a primer on, hey, if you've got an idea and you really want to develop a mobile app, but you haven't done so, and maybe it's a little bit intimidating because of all of the options out there and all the process that's involved in it, then that might be a good talk for anybody that's interested in those things to attend. And then I don't have any speaking coming up, but I do occasionally, I try to attend most of the time the Columbus Ruby Brigade meetups. Those are in downtown Columbus. And we usually host them at the Cover My Meds building. They're, I believe, the second Monday of the month. I would have to go double check that schedule, but I try to pretty consistently go to those. And that's what I've got on the docket at the moment.
Well, nice. Yeah, I think it's great to speak. And if you're in the area, go check out Ryan's talk and let us know how it goes.
Yes.
Cool. So, well, Ryan, thank you for joining us today. It was a pleasure speaking to you. And again, it's great. Oh, and by the way, I'm trying to learn React because I need to build a mobile app. So maybe I should come to your talk. And
Yeah, yeah.
I'm a bit far. I will be in Florida around that period, but it's not sure if I can make it up to Ohio. But maybe another time. If it's recorded, please send me a link. I totally want to do that. Or
Okay.
maybe we could do a little bit of that in a follow up. What do you think?
Yeah, that would be fun.
Perfect. Yeah, we've never actually. Now that I think about it, we've never done a segment on React Native and mobile app development and how people can get started. I find it a bit easier than native. Like I tried doing some Swift, etc. I pride myself on being a very capable developer, and that's really hard. Like it is completely different. I'm used to Word of Docker. I'm used to auto scaling. I'm used to AWS, and it's a bit different to go. So I would love to do that. Let's do that. So again, thank you, Ryan, for joining us. It was great.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I've had a blast. I appreciate it.
And well, then we'll do a follow up. And thank you very much.
Thank
For the
you.
rest of the people, I'll see you next week. Goodbye.